Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Bradley had always been a man of well-established routines and predictable habits, traits that during 15 years of marriage with Samantha created a solid base of mutual trust and emotional stability. At 43, he was a history teacher at a local school, a job he performed with genuine passion and unwavering dedication, always returning home at the same time every afternoon to share with his wife the events of the day, the small victories in the classroom, and the challenges faced with disinterested students. Samantha, 2 years younger, worked as a coordinator at a marketing company, a position she had achieved through hard work and competence, and together they had built a comfortable life in a typical American suburban house, with a well-kept garden and 2 cars in the garage, tangible symbols of the success of their marital partnership. For all those years, Bradley had never questioned his wife's loyalty, considering her not only his romantic partner but also his best friend and closest confidant, someone with whom he could share his deepest fears, professional ambitions, and dreams for the future they imagined building together until old age. The first significant change in their lives occurred when Bradley lost his job due to budget cuts at the school where he had taught for over a decade, a situation that left him deeply shaken not only financially but also in terms of professional identity and personal self-esteem. After months of unsuccessful job searches in the area where they lived, he finally got a position at a state university located about 5 hours away by car, an opportunity that represented both a financial salvation and a considerable logistical challenge for the couple. The solution they found was for Bradley to rent a small apartment near the university, where he would stay during weekdays, returning home only on weekends, an arrangement they initially considered temporary and manageable, a difficult phase that would soon be overcome when he managed to transfer back to the region or when she could move closer to him. During the first months of this new routine, Bradley made it a point to call Samantha every night, talking about his classes, his new colleagues, and his adaptation to the university environment, while she shared the happenings in her own work and the small domestic events that filled her now lonelier days. Gradually, however, the nightly calls began to become more spaced out and superficial, with both citing excessive work fatigue and commitments extending late into the evenings, turning those intimate connection moments into rushed conversations about practical matters such as bills to pay, necessary home repairs, and logistical planning for the weekends. Samantha began to notice that Bradley seemed different during his weekend visits, emotionally distant and less interested in the activities they used to do together, like cooking elaborate meals, cuddling on the couch watching movies, or taking long walks around the neighborhood while chatting about everything and anything. He started bringing stacks of work to grade and research to develop, activities that consumed much of the time previously dedicated exclusively to each other, creating an atmosphere of polite coexistence instead of the warm intimacy that had always characterized their relationship. When she tried to start deeper conversations about how they were adapting to the new situation or about their feelings regarding the physical distance, Bradley responded evasively, claiming that everything was fine and that they would soon find a definitive solution to be together again. Answers that left her with a growing feeling that he was emotionally distancing himself from her in ways that went beyond mere geographical separation. It was during this period of increasing emotional isolation that Samantha met Jordan at a cafe near her workplace, where she often had lunch alone when she didn't have scheduled meetings or professional obligations requiring her presence in the office. Jordan was a young man of 23, a professional model with impressive physical features and a naturally charismatic personality that attracted the attention of practically everyone around him, regardless of age or gender. During the first casual encounter, he demonstrated genuine interest in talking to her, asking questions about her job, hobbies, and opinions on various topics, attention that Samantha hadn't received from Bradley for months and that awakened in her dormant feelings of being desired and valued as an interesting and attractive person. The initial conversations were superficial and friendly, centered on neutral topics like recent movies, books they were reading, and observations about city life, but gradually evolved into more personal discussions about relationships, professional ambitions, and life philosophies, creating between them an intellectual and emotional connection that Samantha hadn't experienced in a considerable time. Without fully realizing how or when it happened, Samantha began eagerly anticipating these casual meetings at the cafe, even adjusting her lunch schedules in hopes of finding Jordan there, and feeling genuinely disappointed on days when he didn't appear or when their schedules didn't align. She began dressing more carefully in the mornings, choosing clothes that made her feel younger and more attractive, applying makeup with more attention to detail, and trying out different perfumes, subtle changes that she initially justified to herself as simply wanting to feel good about herself during a difficult period in her life. Jordan, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in her stories and opinions, listening attentively when she spoke about the challenges in her job, offering different perspectives on complex situations, and making comments that showed he really paid attention to what she said, a behavior that contrasted sharply with the distracted and automatic responses she received from Bradley during their increasingly rare nighttime phone calls. The situation complicated when Samantha realized she was deliberately omitting Bradley from knowing about Jordan, initially because she considered there was no need to mention casual encounters with a coworker from the cafe, but later due to a growing awareness that something about the nature of these meetings could be misinterpreted or cause unnecessary discomfort for her husband. When Bradley occasionally asked about how her day had been or if anything interesting had happened, she mentioned coworkers, professional projects, and household activities, but carefully avoided any reference to Jordan, an omission that made her feel simultaneously guilty and emotionally excited about having a personal secret that was exclusively hers. During her conversations with Jordan, she also avoided mentioning specific details about her marital situation, vaguely referring to a husband who worked out of town without elaborating on the nature of their relationship or the challenges they faced as a couple, creating a sort of emotional compartmentalization where her life with Bradley and her growing friendship with Jordan existed in completely separate spheres of her personal experience. Things intensified when Jordan casually mentioned that his girlfriend was having a birthday and that he wanted to organize a special party for her, but admitted he had no experience in event planning or the organizational skills needed to coordinate a memorable celebration. Motivated by an impulse she would later struggle to explain even to herself, Samantha immediately offered to help him with the planning, claiming she had experience in event organization through her job and would be happy to contribute to making the party a success. Jordan accepted the offer enthusiastically, expressing gratitude in a way that made her feel useful and valued, emotions she hadn't experienced in her personal life for months, and together they began working on the details of the celebration, from choosing the venue to selecting music, decorations, and the menu. During these planning sessions, which extended well beyond casual meetings at the cafe and included frequent text exchanges and some phone calls, Samantha noticed she was investing a disproportionate amount of emotional energy and time into organizing a party for a woman she had never met, motivated by reasons she preferred not to examine too deeply. The uncomfortable truth that Samantha reluctantly admitted to herself was that she was developing growing jealousy toward Jordan's girlfriend, a young woman of approximately her own age who apparently shared with him common interests, youthful energy, and a life stage completely different from the one she was currently experiencing. During conversations about the party, Jordan spoke about his girlfriend with genuine affection, mentioning characteristics he admired in her, experiences they shared together, and plans they made for the future, descriptions that simultaneously touched Samantha emotionally and sparked irrational and unhealthy envy within her. She began fantasizing about what it would be like to receive this kind of devoted attention from a young and passionate man, imagining hypothetical scenarios where Jordan might become romantically interested in her, thoughts that left her simultaneously guilty and emotionally stimulated. These fantasies intensified when Jordan occasionally made complimentary remarks about her appearance, her intelligence, or her organizational skills, observations that were likely genuinely friendly and without romantic intentions, but that she interpreted as possible signs of deeper interest, fueling unrealistic hopes about the development of their friendship. The situation reached a critical point when Bradley, during one of his weekly phone calls, casually mentioned that he was planning to come home a bit earlier that week to spend more time with her, a suggestion that normally would have made her happy but now troubled her because it would interfere with her plans related to the final preparations for Jordan's party. When Bradley asked if she had any social commitments that weekend that might prevent them from spending time together, Samantha replied evasively, saying she had some social engagements, but didn't specify the nature of those engagements or with whom they were. Bradley, noticing something strange in her tone of voice and the vagueness of her answer, pressed for more details, specifically asking who she was spending time with and what kind of social activities she had planned. Reluctantly, Samantha mentioned that she was helping a friend organize a birthday party, referring to Jordan as Jordan without specifying the gender, a deliberate omission that allowed Bradley to assume, based on the name and context, that it was a female friend, an assumption she didn't correct, thus creating her first direct lie about the situation. In the following weeks, occasional references to Jordan in their conversations continued to perpetuate this incorrect impression, with Samantha mentioning party planning activities, meetings to discuss details, and even some personal characteristics of Jordan that could apply to both men and women, always carefully avoiding pronouns or details that might reveal the true gender of her new friend. Bradley, trusting his wife completely and having no reason to suspect any dishonesty, occasionally asked polite questions about how the party planning was progressing or whether Jordan was satisfied with the preparations, questions that Samantha answered in a way that maintained the ambiguity without technically lying, but also without clarifying the real situation. This growing duplicity left her simultaneously anxious and emotionally excited, creating a sense of living a double life that was both stressful and strangely fulfilling, especially considering the emotional monotony that characterized her married life at that time. The dynamic changed drastically the week before the party when Bradley announced that he had managed to negotiate some days off and could spend an entire week at home, news that normally would have made her extremely happy, but that now created a significant logistical dilemma, since she would have to explain her frequent absences and intense involvement in the final preparations for the celebration. When Bradley arrived home and noticed that she seemed distracted and anxious, making several phone calls that she abruptly ended whenever he entered the room and checking texts with unusual frequency, he began asking more direct questions about her plans for the coming days. Samantha, feeling pressured and unable to adequately explain her behavior without revealing aspects of the situation she preferred to keep private, became defensive and evasive, responses that raised in Bradley the first real suspicions that something unusual was happening in his wife's life. The discovery happened completely accidentally when Bradley, looking for the charger for his cell phone, picked up Samantha's phone that was on the kitchen counter, a device that coincidentally received a text message at the exact moment he touched it, causing the screen to light up and automatically display a preview of the received message. The message was from Jordan, thanking Samantha for all her help with the party preparations and mentioning that he was looking forward to seeing her at the celebration, but what caught Bradley's attention most was the profile picture of the sender, which clearly showed a young and attractive man, contradicting completely all the assumptions he had made about Jordan's identity based on his wife's carefully ambiguous descriptions. The initial shock was followed by deep confusion and then a growing sense of betrayal, not necessarily in romantic terms, but definitely in terms of honesty and transparency, values that Bradley had always considered fundamental pillars of his marital relationship. When Samantha returned to the kitchen a few minutes later and found Bradley holding her phone with an expression of confusion and growing irritation, she immediately realized that something had changed drastically in their dynamic, and when he directly asked who Jordan was and why she had allowed him to believe that it was a woman, she found herself confronted with the need to explain months of omissions and dishonesties that now seemed much more significant and problematic than they had appeared when they gradually occurred over time. Her initial attempt to minimize the situation, explaining that Jordan was just a friend and that she hadn't intentionally misled Bradley about his gender, was met with increasing skepticism, especially when Bradley pointed out that she had made specific references clearly intended to keep him confused about Jordan's true identity. The conversation quickly escalated into a more heated discussion when Bradley expressed his frustration not only with the specific dishonesty about Jordan, but with what he perceived as a broader pattern of emotional distancing and lack of transparency that had characterized their last months of marriage. The situation exploded completely when Samantha, feeling cornered and defensive, made the crucial mistake of suggesting that Bradley was being overly possessive and controlling, and that she had the right to have friendships with whomever she wanted, regardless of gender, arguments that, although technically valid, ignored completely the real issues of honesty and transparency at the heart of the conflict. When Bradley responded that the issue wasn't her having male friends, but rather the fact that she had deliberately hidden important information about this friendship and had allowed him to maintain false impressions about the situation, Samantha, driven by a combination of guilt, frustration, and a growing awareness that her feelings for Jordan were more complicated than she was willing to admit, made the statement that permanently destroyed her marriage, shouting that maybe she should be with someone younger and more emotionally available, someone who truly valued and paid attention to her, words that came out of her mouth before she could fully consider them, but that expressed feelings that had been developing subconsciously for months. The silence that followed was deafening, with Bradley remaining completely still for several seconds, processing not only the words he had just heard but also their implications about the true state of his marriage and his wife's real feelings. When he finally reacted, it was with a cold calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst of anger could have been, walking to the front door, opening it completely, and simply telling her to leave if that was what she really wanted, words spoken with a finality that made clear they weren't said in the heat of the moment, but represented a conscious decision that his marriage had come to an end. Samantha, immediately recognizing the magnitude of what had just happened and desperately trying to repair the damage caused by her impulsive words, attempted to retract them, explaining that she hadn't meant them seriously and was just frustrated, but Bradley had crossed an emotional line from which there would be no return, informing her coldly that she had made her true feelings abundantly clear and that he was no longer interested in continuing a marriage where he clearly wasn't valued or desired. After this final declaration, Bradley went upstairs to the bedroom they had shared for 15 years, closed the door behind him, and immediately began packing his clothes and personal belongings into a large suitcase, mechanical and determined movements that made it clear to Samantha, who remained paralyzed on the couch, that he was truly leaving and wouldn't go back on his decision. She stayed seated on the couch for over an hour, hearing the sounds coming from upstairs, the opening and closing of drawers, the sound of the zipper on the suitcase being zipped up, the heavy footsteps in the hallway, each sound representing another piece of their marital life being dismantled definitively. When Bradley came down the stairs carrying his suitcase and an additional bag with some essential items, he passed by her without making eye contact, heading directly for the front door and, before leaving, turned just enough to inform her that he would be back the following weekend to get the rest of his things when she wasn't at home to avoid any further encounters between them. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty house with a finality that left her completely alone with the devastating weight of what she had lost through her own impulsive and destructive choices. In the hours that followed Bradley's departure, Samantha alternated between periods of uncontrollable crying and moments of denial where she tried to convince herself that the situation was temporary and that he would return once he calmed down, but the growing awareness that she had permanently destroyed her marriage through months of dishonesty and an inappropriate romantic fantasy was beginning to take hold inexorably. When the time for the birthday party arrived, she seriously considered not attending, but the prospect of staying alone at home with her thoughts and regrets seemed even more unbearable than facing Jordan and explaining her emotional state, so she decided to go, perhaps driven by a last irrational hope that somehow the night might offer some kind of escape or solution for the chaos her life had become. That night, Samantha attended the birthday party in a completely destroyed emotional state, alternating between panic about the future of her marriage and irrational anger directed both at Bradley and at herself for allowing the situation to reach this catastrophic point. Jordan immediately noticed something was wrong and asked if she was okay, showing the kind of attention and concern she had longed for, but which now seemed completely inappropriate given the circumstances. During the party, she drank more than usual and found herself observing Jordan and his girlfriend with a mix of envy, regret, and a growing awareness of how unrealistic and inappropriate her romantic fantasies had been. When Jordan's girlfriend stepped away briefly to greet other guests, Samantha, driven by a combination of alcohol, emotional desperation, and a last impulse of escapism from the devastating reality of her marital life, approached Jordan and, without any warning or preparation, tried to kiss him. Jordan's reaction was one of complete shock and immediate rejection, pulling away from her with an expression of disappointment and discomfort that left absolutely clear that he considered her behavior inappropriate and offensive. When she tried to explain that she was going through a difficult time in her marriage and that she felt a special connection with him, Jordan responded with brutal honesty that completely shattered any romantic illusions she might have held, informing her that she was old enough to be his aunt, that he had never seen anything in her beyond an older friend who helped him with event planning, and that her behavior was not only inappropriate but also deeply disrespectful both to him and to his girlfriend. Jordan's words, although perhaps harsher than necessary, were delivered with a sincerity that made clear he genuinely hadn't perceived Samantha's romantic intentions and was completely surprised and uncomfortable with her attempt to transform their friendship into something else. Samantha left the party immediately, driving home in a state of complete humiliation and a growing awareness of how drastically she had destroyed both her marriage and her friendship with Jordan through a series of emotionally impulsive and poorly considered decisions. When she arrived home, she found the house empty and an atmosphere of finality that was palpable, with some of Bradley's personal belongings clearly removed and a general sense that he had left not temporarily, but permanently. In the days that followed, Samantha repeatedly tried to contact Bradley through phone calls, text messages, and even through colleagues at the university where he taught, but all her attempts at communication were ignored or blocked, making clear that he had made a definitive decision about the end of their relationship and wasn't interested in discussions, explanations, or reconciliation efforts. The realization that she had permanently lost a man who had unconditionally loved her for 15 years because of an entirely unrealistic romantic fantasy with someone who had never shown her any romantic interest began to settle in gradually, creating a lasting sense of regret and self-reproach. Jordan never responded to her messages or attempts at contact, clearly wishing to distance himself completely from a situation he considered uncomfortable and inappropriate, and she found herself completely alone, without a husband, without the friend she had invested so much time and emotional energy into, and with the devastating awareness that she had been entirely responsible for destroying the stability and happiness that had taken years to build. The divorce was finalized without contestation a few months later, officially marking the end of a marriage that could have been saved if she had made different choices and prioritized honesty and marital commitment over destructive and illusory romantic fantasies that ultimately brought nothing but loss, loneliness, and permanent regret.